got the blue screen of death right after it was closing.
Yeah, really.
Stopped it.
So
Looks like applesauce to me.
if you were to go and like deconstruct some talks, you can go watch the pitches from 500 startups or Y Combinator or Techstars. You know, people are videotaping. You've got to look at your own. The one thing you want to really look at is where in those did someone figure out with the hook. And it could have been a hook about traction. It could have been, you know, we're at this point and it's really it's going like crazy. And you want to set it up. You know, I moved to a place where I foreshadowed the fact that it was the #1 emerging threat, but then at some point, I knew I had it. You know, it was like, it's not a salesman, it's #1. There might be a lot of questions they still have in their head, but someone who walks up and says, look, I've got the #1 emerging threat. Or somebody walks up and says, I've got something which nobody can live without, and in fact, every single person who's an emailer has this problem. Or, you know, I've got the one thing that every single teacher is bugged about, and I've got an insight into it. Every single one of you is actually work. You know, part of what we do here is we sort of take you off of we don't let you go down paths that are small markets. You know, our assumption is that if you stay in a path that's a big market, you find something that's really a big deal. So all of you should just feel really good about that. Just make sure that you've hooked them on the size and intensity of the market. Okay, so you know, then the whole problem was, okay, well then I have to convince them things like, well, did anyone ever pay? You know, given that at this point, just so you know, I had a problem. I want to see the rest of this. I didn't have a product, and I had no idea what people would pay for. So now I'm really reduced to saying, well, at least there are people who care. You know, there are people who, you know, I was going to figure out how to productize it, given we had all this expertise. You know, you have other things you can lean on that make it plausible. And so what you need to do is you need to say, okay, well, are there things I've left open about the business model? Are there things I've left open about the people? Are there things I've left open about the financing? Are there things I've left open about the technology? Are there things which I've left open that someone might ask a question about? And how am I going to cover those? Because I don't have the answer. You know, so you know, you don't yet have the product, but you covered that by saying, but my first customer, even in its stupid form, wants it. You know, you could have had a problem with the channel, and you say, but I've already got 2 that are signed up. So and you have something where, you know, you only have 4 people paying, and you know people must be worried about how people almost surely go to the head when they say about the technology, but then you said, you know, but our plan is to be able to take pictures. So you're all doing that, but remember what you're doing that in the service of. You're doing that in the service of taking off the table holes. That's not the same as the part where you're convincing somebody that they have to have you. They have to have some of your shares. You know, I was trying to get someone in this story, you know, in retrospect, to believe that someone who's able to protect the world against bots is just going to become inherently valuable. And you're going to have to get someone to believe that someone who can, you know, make it possible for monitoring of physical therapy at home, that's going to, for some purpose, that's going to be inherently valuable. And then at that moment, you got them, and then everything else is just making sure that you tie up all of those things. So anyway, I won't really talk about it. It's not that. This is, you want to give people pictures. So big, these are little animal pictures. It's one of the questions that people had here is, well, how the hell do you do it? You know, I wasn't going to tell them how I do it, and I'm not even sure I understood totally how it was done, but you know, I was able to find some analogies. So it turns out analogies are really good. I'm trying to think where you guys, you did a great analogy with a teleprompter. That's a really good analogy. I think that's the thing, so I'm not sure. I don't want to waste too much time on this. So if you want, I'll tell you one thing that really helps is building a story into your talk. At some point, I'll just show you the story one because it was fun. At some point, I said, do you want to hear a story? I was just trying to establish that this stuff is real. And so for you guys, at some point, you can take a moment and say, well, let me give you an example of a story, because people just feel themselves connected to it. In this pitch, I did it this way. I said, if you have a minute, I'll tell you a story. Of course, they want a good story. I said, it turns out the FBI came and the FBI came and asked my co-founders about a particular bot attack that we happen to have been watching. and we were able to identify the responsible bot network, and we could track the network back to its origins. And it turns out the reason we were able to do that is that the bot master actually made some typos. You can see that. And so we were able to track stuff. But here's what that looked like. So this was actual data from the bot. I called it. Yeah, I gave everything a name, a Dalbala sensor. It was some code that one of us had written. So it came to Dalbala sensor. So start naming the things. It's giving a name to your. It's not just your website. You pull it in. What's the object that what is the thing that it is that you can give a name to? Or, what's the name of that place where people come and look for? Giving things names that are sort of consistent. It's not just a website, and it's not just a marketplace, but what's the name of that thing? I don't know yet. But as you can start to name things, they start to create, there's some value to them. And then I walked them through the story, and then which is a good story. Said people arrested, and I pointed out, here's a picture, and what you don't know, the guys on both sides are law enforcement, and the guy in the middle is the place where those typos were being typed from, and he's currently serving time in jail. I forget what country that was at this point. So, anyway, so do you have a feel for how this kind of thing goes? And then I went back to the story, which was we make money. We're really focused on making money. And then I talked about why there's barriers to entry, because we're listening places people don't know we're listening. We have relationships we're setting up, similar to what we did. And then I ended by saying, here's roughly the path we're on. We're gonna sign up. These are things I had under control. Actually, I knew these guys would sign up, so I wouldn't. If I hadn't known that the guy at ISS had already told me face to face that deal would happen, then I would never have said it here. Because here's what I know: whatever I say, they're talking to me for 3 months now, maybe 5, 6 months. They'll remember. That's their job. That's what they do. They remember. They write it down. On this day, you told me this. And then, a month from now, how you doing with that OEM deal? 2 months from now, how you doing with that OEM deal? And then, after 2.5, 3 months, and the OEM deal sounds the same, they don't believe anything I said in my talk. So you need to say things that are sort of your sure is done. So, and then, more or less at the end of that pitch. So I gave that pitch in that forum to 6 VCs, and I got 5 term sheets. So Connor Perkins wrote a term sheet, Sigma Partners, InterWest. NEA, the guy wanted to do the deal so badly that even though he couldn't get the term sheet in by the deadline I had, he personally wrote a check into the deal. So when people tell you they run around and they talk to hundreds of investors, I just think that's a mistake. I just think that means they don't know what they're doing. Because actually, the story can just become investigative by your control, by making it so that people can't not have it. And then you just take off the table all the reasons that they wouldn't do the deal. And what people are looking to do is buy into your deal. And they're looking for, and don't talk to people who aren't possible investors. So, okay, so I hope that's a little bit helpful, just to deconstruct something that someone actually did. Okay. It's probably not true that I only pitched 6. I probably pitched 3 in advance that I didn't want to take money from just to get the practice. And then I went to people that I thought actually could possibly write checks, and it just went smoothly. But there's a lot of work. You don't just pitch and then nothing happens. You pitch, and then they do 4 or 5 months of just talking to everybody in the world and calling customers and making you go fly out to meet people who are there, who can give them advice, and they want to make sure they're hearing the same story. So there's a lot of this stuff that has to be consistent. You just have to make it all consistent.
I still want to know why you were 2 years ahead.
Well, it was further back. It was
Because he was.
Because we knew where to listen. We had 2 years of monitoring and finding. It turns out we had a lot of patterns that we recognized. The way this thing works is we watched bots find their way to their bot master. It was an engineering problem. It turns out that back then you could put these payloads of bad code, and you could send it out. You could attach it to like pornographic pictures or the fake PowerPoints or something, and people would click on them unknowingly, and then they would get infected. But then they would have a problem with going to find the master. And it turns out that people couldn't put like the IP address of the master in there, because if they did, then when one piece of code was found, they could just kill that IP address. So they had to use protocols to find each other on the web, and we were watching that. And it was called rallying behavior. And so we had tons of data that we had sucked off the net for 2 years that allowed us to figure out what the patterns were. So if someone was going to find it, it was going to take them at least 6 months, probably longer. First you have to find out where to go, to get the agreements, to listen, then you have to look at the patterns, so we had some solution. That turned out to be true, by the way. In fact, we're probably still ahead on all that. Yeah.
I just want to reemphasize one thing you said when you went on that one bullet point where you were talking about that contract.
Yes.
That, for, you know, investors are going to watch you for a while, so if you're telling them that XYZ is going to happen by a certain date or next month or next week, you know, be really reasonably sure that something's going to happen. Yeah, because it does, you know, when stuff starts to fall apart, then people start backing away from you. So sandbag a little.
You don't want to have anything fall apart. You just want to be in complete control of what people learn about you.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't want to hide anything. That's the other thing. It's just, there's nothing in this. There's not one lie. There's not one shred of something that I wasn't 100% sure that they could. Every single letter that I said, I knew how to go and help them back it up. That's where you want to be, because even if you were right and it wasn't a lie, but you didn't know how to back it up, the mere fact that they would ask you the question and you didn't know how to back it up would just slow the process down. Your job is not to slow the process down at all. You don't want to give anybody anything they can ask you that you wouldn't know how to get the answer to them like this. That would be, because your goal is to make the time go less. So anyway, getting back to the bigger picture here, your job when you go pitch is you need to be hungry for capital. You know, you need to be hungry for capital. You're there because you've got something. I was hungry for capital. I mean, I knew that these thoughts were really bad. I knew that there were people who cared about it. I didn't know how I was going to get the solution to them. I knew that I was listening for a long time. And I knew that people would pay for it. And I just couldn't wait. You need to think about that. You need to think, look, I've got people whose email is being stopped. I've got to do something. I've got to build it out, and I've got to stay ahead. I've got people who actually are desperate to sell more plants, and I've got people that want those plants, and they're wasting all the time. And there's nothing else going on in that room. You're not there to educate them about what you're doing. You spent a lot of time and money and risk to educate them, learn all the things. They can ask you all the questions they want. You shouldn't tell them any answers. You know, if they ask you a question like, well, you know, tell me about the content you have in your, you know, that you're giving to teachers. You say, well, why do you need to know that? I don't mean to be in an obnoxious way. I'm just, maybe that was an example of being. I'll go back and think of all. It's like, you know, but what I'm saying is, you can pull a chair in for this. Is you just need to be thinking. You should think about what you know as being really valuable.
Yeah.
And there's no reason you need to educate anybody on what you're doing. The only possible reason to educate them is to help them fall in love with what you're doing so they can't not have it, your shares, or to help them actually do the diligence that they need to do to be able to make sure that they can make a check. Otherwise, why would you tell them anything? You know, it's your valuable thing. You're not there to teach them anything. And it doesn't actually help you to teach people stuff. It doesn't. It just, because every question they ask you, if you don't know why they're asking it, if you can't in your head say, oh, this person doesn't understand what I'm doing enough to want our shares. And so now let me make sure that I can understand what it was that they would need it to look like. So you might say, well, you're asking that because you're worried that it's too expensive for us to make it, or are you asking that because you're thinking that that's what makes us valuable? I'm just curious, why are you asking that? Because I was framing that in my head because, well, they probably aren't in love. You know, if they're in love, maybe they don't even understand why you would write content or something. I mean, I don't know. But it's not until you have a sense that they really want something. And you'll feel the difference. I mean, people have raised money. There's this moment where you see, the conversation is not now about, do you want the shares? The conversation is now about, you know, let me make sure that I'm not doing something stupid, or I can't afford it, or that you're not making some mistake that I have to check out. So you're either in the state of they're going to love you, or they love you and your indulgence. And I just encourage you to try to learn what that feels like, because you want to move in very quickly to the place where you do indulgence. Then you want to make that go as fast as you can. Am I saying too much, or am I?
I'm not sure that I understand what you're saying and have experienced that on both ends of it.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure it's
So we can just go in the room and just talk about it. So
Yeah.
let's do Mike's first, because it was the first one out.